Hi, I'm Dov.
Hello and hello, I'm Daniel. Hi. Welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity, and making meaning. And yeah, we've got absolutely no plan whatsoever today, have we? So this is a bit
Yeah.
different from usual. So yeah,
I
yeah.
just want to say this is a little bit of a non sequitur, but the software or whatever that we use, it's called Riverside. And before we started recording, it did this countdown that reminded me so much of old movies. So now I feel like we're on an old movie screen.
Yeah, yeah, like black and white.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess that's uh so I'm obsessed with photography, and obviously I can't go out and do much photography, so I watch a ton of photography videos. And sometimes I think about like having ME as being living sort of in black and white a little bit, or I guess it's more shadowy than maybe because colors and shadow don't aren't as vibrant. But I was thinking then about I watched these POV street photography videos, so people kind of have a
Mm,
GoPro and they're
mm,
walking around, and luckily it doesn't make me like seasick or anything. They're walking around and they're taking shots, and then they show you the photographs, and some of them shoot in black and white and some of them shoot in color, and both are quite beautiful. So I suppose even though today we're going to talk a little bit about, well, we're vaguely planning to talk about the the ways that our social lives are our lives are our social lives are kept very muted and small, or I don't know how to say it. They're diminished. I feel like
mm,
these words are negative. Anyways, black and white has a lot of beauty in it. Okay, go
mm.
Dan.
No, no, no. I wasn't gonna say. I wasn't gonna say. I was just wondering. Because you mentioned about like, sort of like old movies or theaters or whatever, and I was gonna ask, when was the last time you were at the cinema, at a movie theater?
I think the last movie I saw in the theater was in 2012-ish, and
Wow.
it was a Wes Anderson film about a kid at camp or something. Moon. Does that sound familiar? Talk
Don't
about
know.
colors. It was, Wes Anderson.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't
Such
seen many of his films.
huh?
Mm. I haven't seen many of his films, so I probably haven't seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. There, it was. I
Mm.
really loved it at the time. I thought it was so good, and then I remember trying to watch it on video and not liking it as much. And maybe that's because so much of their his films are about the setting, and maybe having the big color, all the aesthetic attunement going on in those films in the big screen was different. But sometimes I think about how I used to go to the movies in New York a lot, and I went to college in New Jersey at Princeton, and
Mm.
there was a train to New York, and I would go to New York on the train and go to these all day film festivals. I was
Mm.
very socially, I am, and was like incredibly socially anxious. So I would just go to New York and go to a dark theater by myself and watch like four or five films, and they always had themes, and it was. I didn't do that all as an older adult, though I did go to the movies when I lived in New York much later. Yeah, when's the last time you went to a cinema, and do you miss it?
Yeah, I have been like a really small number of times since I've got ill. And I was just trying to think. I think I took my daughter to see Frozen 2, and that
Mm,
was the last time that I think I went, and that was, yeah, whatever year that was, 3 years ago. I don't know. And it was really good actually, because she grew up in the kind of like, prime sort of Frozen,
mm.
girl sort of thing, and so yeah, it was lovely to do that. But whenever I have been to the cinema, it's like I'll go and I'll like wear sunglasses and put noise cancelling headphones in.
Mhm.
So I must look really strange, but that doesn't bother me. But it's just to try and like dampen down the kind of like the the sensory overload that you get. So yeah, I haven't been for a while.
How did you do
But
with
yeah,
all the pop? Do you have popcorn smells there in theaters or?
yeah, that doesn't really bother me so much. It's more like people's cologne and perfume and
Mm,
stuff
yeah,
that's like this. I think there's certain types of cologne perfume that kind of just hit me like really sort of yeah, and almost like make you like others doesn't bother me at all. It's just certain ones. It must whether it's like a certain ingredient or whatever. It's like it just like makes you feel queasy and yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah.
but no
It's
popcorn's awesome.
really the We'll go back to movies in a second. I'll just what do you call it? Tangent. Go on a tangent. Smells. I don't know if it happens there, but here, um, all things that are delivered from places now have this like really intense Febreze kind of smell, and
All right.
apparently I did a little digging, and especially like Amazon, it can just overpower you, and
Huh.
it's evil. It's an evil. It seems like it's a chemical smell that could be quite harmful. I think most of them can be, but and I read about working conditions and people work in factories and they're getting sick because of those smells. And I sometimes think like the world is not going to end with like fire or floods or a meteor. It's going to end because people are so fucking attached to their stinky,
What?
smelly detergent. Like,
So what
all
is it?
those. Yeah.
Do they spray it on the packaging or something like that, or is
I
it just
think what I think they do is spray I think they spray the warehouses. I think it's
okay?
probably something to keep away quote pests or so. I think whatever it
Right,
is,
interesting.
I think it's bad for you.
Yeah, yeah.
That's my word for it is evil, but I think it's very bad for people's health and it's overpowering and then people have to I think it still smells from being in warehouses and people are working in those warehouses and
Mm.
also then people's cars people put those little what do you calls it like I never use
Air
those
freshener
yeah
things.
I mean
Yeah.
that you could kill people with those things like
Mm.
I never used them I always thought they were heinous and so also that makes the I've had people step out of their Amazon trucks and the entire neighborhood like this entire I'm like
Yeah.
where the sidewalk is to my house is maybe or the whatever is the development I live in is got to be like half a swimming pool or more and it's like overpowering um
Sounds-
So I think it's a combination of something they're spraying, I think, to keep pests away, and people's cars having those horrible um, smelly things in them,
Mm.
and yeah, and then sometimes people smoke, and then stuff smells like smoke, which also makes me say, yeah,
Mm.
um, I think that these products are, people want to sort of like block their own body smells, but I'd much rather just smell people's body smells.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
And it's
true.
weird.
Yeah.
Like I think
Yeah.
people, the more they wear, the more they get used to it. So then they think they have to wear
Yeah.
more.
And use more. Yeah, definitely. It's yeah, and it's just strange how certain ones affect me and others don't. So it's yeah, whether there's certain things in certain and yeah, like we're all different, aren't we? But yeah, certainly with the ME thing is certainly a prevalent thing within kind of the community, isn't it? In terms of like people being affected by and then it impacts on your ability to socialize as well, doesn't it? And things because just like even if you were able to go out and you said to the person that you're going out with, like, oh, can you not wear, perfume or cologne or whatever, and then, but then there's no guarantees that people around you aren't going to be. So it's like you can't sort of manage. There's no way to manage that situation, is there? Which
Yeah,
makes it
that's
hard.
one of the. I mean, that's an interesting tie-in to our vague topic
Mm,
today. Because there are so many things that keep us out of social spaces, and scented stuff is one of them, and then other sensory. I think when I was before I moved into the condo that I live in now, there was I was trying to find housing that was affordable, and any of the sort of state sponsored affordable housing, it's like it was what they called accessible, meaning wheelchair accessible, but it wasn't sensory accessible. And
Mm,
I know there are people who I think are trying to address this in some way, but like, just being in a hallway of a building that's like where the carpets are Febrezed or whatever. The carpets are really
mm,
smelly of some kind of scented stuff. Above you are the lights, and then I remember just when I was going to look at places, like just getting from say the elevator door to the apartment door, like made me so sick. It was a nightmare, and I think yeah. So it makes I think for me any kind of new environment having to sensory process no matter what takes a lot of work. But then, of course, there's all it's like you're in they should make a video game of like a person with ME trying to get from one place to
mm,
another and like having to avoid the smells and the sounds and
mm,
um, all the sensory stuff.
mm.
What would you say is your like hardest for you sensory wise? Would it
Like kryptonite, yeah. Yeah, I think it is. It's certain strong perfumes, but and then at other times it's not. It is like noise. Um, I think it varies. But what's interesting is it can really like fluctuate. Like sometimes certain smells or whatever don't bother me, and then the same smell might really sort of get to me like if you, a couple of days later, and it's like, well, what's changed? Because like my energy levels are about the same sort of thing, and it is really random, isn't it? But yeah, I think what one thing's hard is like being in a busy environment where there's just like um hubbub or whatever, and then it's like that just can feel quite overwhelming. So like I can watch a film on the TV, um, and have a decent volume and it not bother me, but being in a completely different environment, it might be similar sort of like volume level, but it's just like coming from everywhere, and that's kind
right?
of what it's like, the overwhelming nature of it, isn't it? When you're in a busy environment, and that's like just being in a hospital or whatever like that is just draining for me. So for people that we've talked to on the podcast or whatever, that talked about their severe ME experiences, and just the thought of actually kind of enduring being like an inpatient in a
Yeah,
hospital, like when if
yeah,
you might just go in for an appointment or something, and then be there for an hour or two, and you're drained, aren't you? But
yeah,
then the thought of actually having to sort of like be staying there for any period of time. So yeah, whenever we've had somebody on the podcast and they've talked about that experience of being in hospital with severe ME, it's just that would really that I can really understand how hard that must be. Um, you know.
yeah. I've been in the hospital a few times, and it was brutal. And people I think for whatever reason, medical staff get angry at you when you try to carve out a space that's less painful, because they feel like you're asking. I don't know if they feel like you're asking for special treatment or whatever, or that they're just like. I remember the first time, the year that I got ME. I'd not yet been diagnosed, but I ended up in the ER. I had convulsions. I
Mm,
rode my bike to. I was still kind of pretending that I wasn't sick. I had
mm,
um and I was still working and exercising and kind of trying to ignore all the ways I felt like all the like I would swim and I would feel like I was going to die, and I just didn't believe my own brain or my own experience. And
mm,
so the last day I went to work, oh sorry, the last day I went to work, I rode my bike and walked into the building and went into convulsions and wound up in the ER. And when I got to the hospital, they were shining lights in my eyes. And I was like, I was like,
Yeah, yeah,
stop it. And they were like, this is what we do. Like, this is our, they were like, they kept doing all these things that were just horrifically painful. And their response to me was like this anger. And this is like, how do you expect us to do our job if we're not poking you? If we're not like shining a light in your eyes and putting like loud things by your ears? And it was quite a wild, um it's kind of, the most absurdist comedy is like these people, their job is to help you, and they're like, how can we help you
mm,
if we're not doing all these horrible things to you? You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. We've got to make sure you're alive. Like, yeah,
But I think they
yeah,
could find some ways. I do think it's very possible to have. And the other thing is, I think that things that would help people with ME at the hospital would be comforting for everyone. Like, nobody, whether or not
yeah,
you're
yeah,
like
yeah.
acutely aware of it, nobody does well when they're sick in an environment of chaos and bright lights and loud noises. And yeah. um
I was just thinking about when I got ill with ME as a child. So I was like 10, like when I first got ill, and you end up just like trawling around different doctors' surgeries and hospital, children's outpatients and all this sort of thing. And I remember going. I think we saw a doctor privately somewhere, like out somewhere miles away, and I think I'd just been like, they do all the thing like shining the bright lights, all that sort of stuff, and I just remember like the whole. It was a bit. It was like a comedy moment, really, because it was the whole, where they tap you with have a little hammer and they tap your knee with a hammer, and that was always in like cartoons, isn't it? For some reason, there's always like a scene where somebody's like, and I just like made my leg jump like like 2 feet in the air or whatever. And I was like 10 or 11, and the doctor's like, that's not meant to happen. And it was just like, and I just did it because I thought that's what was meant to happen, sort of thing. So yeah, it was like, yeah, as a kid, I suppose you just got to find some humor, haven't you? Like in situations.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it I don't know if you've watched Ren's. Have you watched the whole thing with, Ren, who has,
Hmm.
I think he thought he had an ME at one point, and then they realized it was chronic Lyme, and he's a musician, and he recently had this, he's been in this conflict with this company that sort of, they sell you some kind of beats that you put in your music, and basically they made him take down, I think, his most, or one of his most popular songs, which is, it's called Sick Boy, BOI. And so then he did this thing where he made this video, um that's, there's some violence in it, and but he's basically like, um having sort of getting back in some way at these people, through the video, like challenging these people, and sort of like, I don't know, there's all these scenes where they're like tied up in chairs, like where, like, the actors who play these people who are fucking with him, like, where, I don't know, there's this narrative that's a bit violent, where they've been kidnapped or whatever, and they're tied to chairs, and they're being
Hmm.
held like against their will. And but I do often, like, I think after I watched it, I remember that I often have this idea of making a dark comedy in which, like, basically, some kind of medical people who just routinely gaslight, and fuck with people, where they have some, where they're in a situation sort of like that, but more of darker comedy. And I'm sure
Hmm.
it's been done about other things, but just like, um sometimes it's like there is a sort of bleak comedy in the whole, like, trying to get care from a medical system that is built to not care for, like, it's built
Hmm.
to sort of, um try to keep you from care as much as I don't know. It's I don't know if what I said made any sense, but I do sometimes. It's like when people are like, take your earplugs out, like you're just making yourself used to quiet, and then you'll never be able to hear sounds. And I want to be like, let me like break your kneecap and you crawl on the floor, and we'll see if that you
Mm.
just need to get used to the pain of like crawling on the floor with a broken kneecap because
Yeah,
that's what it feels like a lot to me with sort of the you know you, you just have to get out and do stuff or you're gonna let if we want to go into deconditioning, like you're just deconditioned and blah blah blah, and you just need to go out and do stuff, and it's like um it's not funny, but it is absurd. I think there's an absurdity to it, and the commonality of it also makes it sort of
yeah,
funny and absurd. And I feel like someone's going to make a great dark comedy about it, but
yeah.
probably won't be me at
It's
this point.
it's a bit it's a bit as well, like that, the whole kind of like idea, the sort of concept of um people, many of us with chronic illnesses not following the kind of normal recovery process that is expected of us and that
Yeah.
should be expected of us. And it's interesting because we're sort of in two of the recent podcasts that we've done, one with Lizanne that'll be out soon, and then the one that just went out today with Una. Both of them kind of talked about the experience of having. Well, Una was with a cancer, and then and Lizanne was appendicitis, but both having treatment, effective treatment, and then seeing other people kind of recover and go on to kind of
Mm.
live their lives, and sort of then being sort of stuck or left stuck in a situation that makes you, that leads you in down a path of, I suppose, uh, like uh, like Lizanne says at the beginning of the episode, that I don't know whether it's out yet or going to be out yet. So, but she talks about it being a bit nervous about coming on a podcast and talking because of this feeling of being, what you've coined now is sort of socially deconditioned, which is an ironic term in a sense because we get labelled with deconditioning. So I love it, and I said I think you should write a paper, and and you should be known as the person that's coined. Well, I haven't even googled it, so it'd be interesting. Did you Google the term like
No, no, I
social condition
haven't.
decon? So we'll have to see if it's actually a term, but there is this sense of spending, like Lizanne talked about, sort of like having a made up language with a dog sort of thing, almost like you can go down these routes, can't you, where you spend so much time on your own that you sort of you start to live in sort of fantasy worlds and things like this, don't we? We have to kind of like create a world around us that might be nonsensical, but actually that enables us to, function. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on like ways that like what has changed about their sense of socialness and the social world and sort of like where you are versus where the world is. Like I think I when I first got ME, I thought of it as like there's this what are those spinning doors that you have to go in? I had this feeling like there's
Rotating
this
door.
spinning door that you have to go in to get in a building, and everyone else can go through it, but I couldn't go through it, and it's like I'm on the outside and everyone's kind of going through this door into the world, and sometimes
Uh,
I don't even know what it would be like to go to a fucking grocery store. Like why don't you talk about your experience? Didn't you have a weird sort of grocery store experience recently where like you hadn't been in so long that you just felt
yeah, what was it? What was I looking for? I can't remember. I told you something, didn't I? I think I
yeah.
emailed something, and I can't remember it. I can't remember what the anecdote was now.
You
What was
just
I
like
saying?
gone to a grocery store and you felt like an alien kind of because
Yeah, yeah, and I do feel like that, and um, uh, it's like all the energy is saved up for that kind of like half an hour out of the house, or 45 minutes, or however long it is, and then you come back in and you're back in bed. But it's like when you're out there, it's like yeah, feeling like quite alien, um, and then functioning it in that shop environment and just sort of feeling like, yeah, like you sort of you do feel like a sort of fish out of water a little bit, and sort of almost like um just yeah, like different things, like just noticing changes on like wrappers of chocolate bars and things like that. Like, oh, they've changed the design on something, or they've just, or
Yeah.
they've like seeing products that you've not seen before or whatever, like just weird stuff. Like, and I know that like people in everyday life will see new things but it's the fact that like not having been in a shop for like weeks and weeks or whatever, and then or months, and and then being in a shop and then having to function in that environment, and then being exhausted when you get home just from doing something that um everybody takes for granted and just does, not everybody, but yeah, many people within society
Yeah.
do on a regular basis, and then yeah, feeling like very alien in that environment because you don't function in society like in the same way, um and it being like so many people have said on the podcast in the past, that like not recovering from something, and then just
Yeah.
being in this sort of static state is really isolating, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I've been 10 years like in I've spent kind of 10 years in bed, and it's a weird ass thing. But I was thinking as you were talking, I was thinking um about going to stores and what an everyday kind of thing that is for people without ME, and even before I think like I've always had sensory issues at stores, and like there, even when I was a kid, the chemicals that would come off the clothing, new clothing, would like
Mm.
kind of make me, I'd kind of fall asleep in the mall because of the chemicals. Like I
Oh,
just
wow.
had a really hard time with those chemicals. But oh uh yeah, just I think it's I almost feel like when I think about trying to go out, I almost feel like it's that feeling of looking in a funhouse mirror, like everything's kind of distorted in a weird way, and sort of keeps me off balance. But I I love going. I love grocery stores. I loved going before I got ME. I just loved going to the grocery store, and it took me some time to give it up. Like every time I would go, I would nearly pass out at the end, and
Mm.
like my brain would stop working by the time I got to the register, and they'd be like, "Take out your card," and I'd be like, I couldn't like process it. Like I couldn't process information, and I just could barely stand up, and basically collapse. And I still, it took me, I think, a year or two before I entirely stopped trying to go to the grocery store, because I think it is one of the things that just makes you feel like a quote normal human.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I, I, I don't know that I actively miss going to the grocery store, but I have my moments where it's like, I'd like to pick out my own fucking apple, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you get the delivery and there's always like a banana that's just a bit squished or whatever, and you're like, well, I wouldn't have chosen that banana. It's like, yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Um,
Uh,
yeah, but what do you like when you think of the phrase social deconditioning, which is kind of a joke, but also not a joke?
yeah.
Like, um, for you, is it more about just the weirdness of trying to process information when you're out, or this feeling that closed, there's this closed door between you and what you imagine to be the outside world, or something else? Like, do you feel like actual social interactions?
Yeah, I think more about, if you use the term social deconditioning, it feels like it's about engaging with other people in a meaningful way in society, I suppose. And like, I know we have, we've got a podcast about making meaning, so like we try and have those sort of conversations on the podcast, don't we? But like, um, I think it's yeah, like and I don't think I've spoken about this much on the podcast actually. Earlier in this summer, I had a much better period for a short few weeks. And we went. My parents happened to have tickets to like an Indian food event in the village hall, and and my wife and I were like, well, should we go? Have I got the energy to go? How long can I go for? Like, how long will it last? How busy will it be? Will it be like you have all these sort of like sort of conundrums around like whether to go and just do something, or like there's the whole COVID thing and like all that sort of thing that you're
Yeah.
thinking about as well. And so but then it's also thinking about like just how doing something. So we decided to go, and I went with my brother and my sister-in-law, and we actually had a really nice time. And it was just like ended up meeting um the wife of my childhood friend who lives on a farm, and he's a farmer up the fields. So it was like really nice to meet her and chat, and it was like coming away. It's like, oh yeah, that's like what it's. And not too long after that, I just like crashed out, and not from that particular event, but my whole body just like went back to square one again. And but I was really glad that I had had that experience, because it is that kind of like, oh yeah, this is what it's like to be normal, not normal, but to talk to people, and sort of socialize in that way. But you do, because there is this sense that like when you're talking to somebody in face to face in a real sort of social setting, you sort of you you are sort of like kind of thinking, how am I presenting? Am I am I how, am I making sense? Like, is my brain engaged in this? Like, it is interesting, isn't it? And how you can feel quite out of, I've used the term sort of fish out of water, but you can feel a little bit alien, can't you, in that environment? Like, when would the last time for you be that you may be in a situation that you were like talking to somebody new face to face? Is that something that's happened, or is it a long time since that's happened? Like talking to somebody in a sort of social situation?
Hmm.
Because I guess
I mean,
yours
I
is
guess
is a
occasionally I meet new neighbors,
hmm
and that's, but I, it's awkward. It's like, I mean, it's nice. I love my neighbors, but I also like, um, what do I do? Like I take photographs, and I'm like, what do I do if I'm out with my camera and I don't have the spoons to, it's like I have to kind of
hmm
figure out. And I've actually, I think one of the things that's sometimes I just sort of, I don't know how to navigate people just trying to be friendly when I'm like, I don't have the spoons to be friendly on that kind of like. I
yeah
think one of the things I've noticed, um, like with ME, I'm often much more aware of like all the ways my brain has to process things for a social interaction. And there's so many little cues that your mind is thinking about and looking for, like, what do I look like? Like, do I look a mess? Uh-oh, I just realized I'm wearing the same clothing I've been wearing for the last like
yeah
decade and haven't washed them. Like, do I have stains on my shirt? Um, like what, like how long is this interaction going to take? If I say hi, how are they doing? Are they okay? Like, it's like my brain is processing like, oh, they're going for a walk with their dog. So does that mean that I should just like not bother them? What if they just want to
yeah
have, it's like the question of, do you say hi? Do you not say hi? Do I have the spoons to say hi? Are they going to notice like that I don't ever like that I don't have, I haven't showered, I haven't changed my clothes. I don't know. There's just so many little
mm,
things, and it's exhausting even before you get to the interaction part. I feel like my brain's already doing so much work, social work. And I think before I got ME, I wasn't so acutely aware of like all the ways our brains and bodies sort of maneuver around a social interaction. Like it
yes
seems like a simple thing, but there's nothing simple about any of it. And then you're talking to someone, and then you're like, oh, do they want to be talking right now? Do they want to be walking their dog? Are they noticing the stain on my shirt? Like, you know, am I making a good impression? Like, I don't know. Like, I think as a socially anxious person, I've always maybe um had a more of a heightened awareness of sort of how I'm behaving in a social interaction, but I think it's much more intense with ME because my brain is going a little slower, and so I'm noticing, and then I'm also getting tired from it in a way that, I didn't. I mean, I think, yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then it's also about like to what extent you try and explain your illness or
Right.
try and ignore the fact that you might be walking. Like how um I think I've maybe mentioned it before, but like our sort of up here in the northeast of England, people are really friendly and really chatty, and it's a really nice thing. But it's also like then, if you have a food delivery and you're like emptying your food, and then you're trying to focus on that one task, and then you've got like a chatty
Yeah.
delivery driver, and it's like, and then you're trying to have a conversation, but also put things away at the same, or try and empty the baskets as quick as possible, but then also like having to try and navigate this conversation with somebody who's just wants to talk about the sheep in the field or something like that, or like
And
or
then they
then
might be wearing scented stuff. There's that
yeah,
part too. Like,
or have you got the day off work and all that sort of stuff, and then to what extent do I then explain to them
right.
why I'm not working, or
Yes.
like or is this a good chance to educate somebody about ME, or is this just like a drain on my energy, and like what do I say because I'm actually trying to empty fuck things. I'm trying to empty things. But then it's also like appreciating the social interaction and actually enjoying the fact that you talk to somebody different. And it's
Yes.
it's it's a funny dynamic that, and it very
Yes.
much depends on how much energy I've got on any given occasion as to whether I'm able to even got the energy to empty the. And then sometimes you do need some extra help, and then you have to sort of explain, and you just don't have the energy to carry the things in the first place. So yeah, it's hard. It is hard.
Yeah.
Um,
I
there's
find
not an
often
easy.
my brain has a really hard time doing two things at once.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and like, yeah, it's the tension of really enjoying a little like that kind of
Mhm.
social interaction that we don't get to have, which is
Yeah,
the everyday stuff, like the kind of waving to a neighbor, going to the store and just saying hi to people, or just
yeah,
like talking to a cashier. Like, we don't get those funny little
yeah.
social interactions. There's actually, I'll try to find it to send to you. To We could post it on our on the info, but on I'm on Threads a little. I find it, and this well, okay, one thing at a time. I'm not on a lot. I find it kind of exhausting, but I also often find little gems. And there's this person who, um, a lot of her thread is just her being out in the world and making observations about little moments. I think I sent you,
mm,
and some people have illustrated some of them, and they're beautiful because it's the kind of stuff that we don't have access to, which is just sort of, or a lot of us don't. Some of us, I'm sure, do, but like, before I got ME, I was on the bus a lot, or when I lived in New York, I was on a subway, and I was like, even if I wasn't talking to people, I was noticing a lot of like signs and people and, interactions, and a parent
mm,
with their kid, like, um, you know, so many different things and I kind of forgot about that. Or like walking on a city street, or walking in a beautiful woods and seeing dogs running around or whatever. Like, there's so many of these everyday mundane kind of things that we just don't have access to. And I saw this person's feed with these observations about like sort of mundane daily life things, and I was like, oh my god, I don't get that anymore. Like, I don't think I'd been able to name it
mm.
before I read that recently. So I'll post
Yeah.
a link to her stuff. But yeah, what were you gonna say?
No, it's just reminded me of I used to love that experience of hearing like just hearing people talk and stuff, and when our kids were little we used to go and stay at a friend's uh apartment down on the south coast in Eastbourne, and there's like a really long from the marina, which is where we were staying, like to Eastbourne, it's a good, like, I don't know how many miles it is, or it's a long distance anyway. But you can walk along the seafront. So when the kids were little, I'd push them in a pram or whatever, and I'd go for a jog or whatever, and like, and but I used to love just like walking past and like the like hearing snippets of conversations of people that were just talking, walking along the seafront, because it's quite a unique experience to walk along the seafront, isn't it? And like, you think most people are out there sort of leisurely, doing things, or you'd hear people on the phone or whatever. And it was always interesting to hear snippets of people's conversations, and I used to love that. And I used to like write, sometimes just uh, write down kind of like little snippets of things that I'd heard. And one of my favorite times about hearing a conversation in the street was I worked in quite a diverse but also deprived area of a city in the Midlands. And I was on my lunch break one day, and I went to go and get my hair cut, and I was walking back towards my office, and I overheard one guy telling another guy that he'd been shot, and he was waiting to have the bullet like taken out of his leg or something like this. And I was like, and that's not actually something that happens that often in the UK that much. But yeah, it was like, and when you're walking past somebody and you sort of like, you want to walk a little bit slower because you want to hear a bit more of the story. And it was like, and I was like, no, I'm just going to seem really weird if I kind of hang around. I don't want to get into anything. So I was like, so I just carried on working, but I just heard this kind of like really short conversation about, oh, I've not seen you in a while, and why are you on crutches or whatever. And he was like, oh yeah, I'm shot. So yeah, that's got completely nothing to do with what we were talking about whatsoever, but it's just one of those little snippets of
But that's exactly
life.
what we're talking about too.
Yeah,
There's
it's
like,
about hearing life, isn't it? And
yeah,
hearing
yeah, like
society. And yeah,
you mentioned when you were on vacation that like you got to go on a vacation. Is that okay to talk about here a little bit? Your first
yeah,
time
yeah.
in a long time,
Uh,
and you were kind of you were resting, and you heard people walking by, and like, didn't you talk about how joyful
yeah,
that was?
yeah. I did. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I went on holiday for a week. Um, a friend of mine. It's a really beautiful story actually, because a friend of mine, who was my pen pal when I had ME, and she has ME, when I was a teenager, and we were pen pals, and we lost touch, um, uh, kind of when we both kind of sort of got married, and I moved away and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we'd never met. And so hello, Katie, if you're watching or listening. And yeah, we got in touch about year or so ago, and it was just really nice reconnecting. And she invited us, me and my family, to go and stay at her caravan, and we went for a week, and we had a lovely time. But it was really interesting, that experience of, because I live on a farm, and I just don't hear people. It's lovely and quiet, but it also just don't hear society, don't hear people, experience people. And yeah, just literally lying there. And it was, um the bottom end of the caravan, where or the little road that the caravan was on, was where lots of people were walking past, sometimes during the day, or at the beginning of the day, or the end of the day, because they were going to the beach, because the path to the beach is along there. And it was just really a unique experience, just hearing families chatting on the way to the beach or coming back from the beach. Or it was kind of, and it was a leisurely thing, because people were kind of on holiday or whatever, but hearing people cooking, and families and stuff, and what might usually be quite draining noises. And I don't know if I could live around that all the time, but for that week, it was just, I really enjoyed it. And I wasn't expecting to enjoy the busyness
Yeah.
of life, because it was being around people again, which I did enjoy. Yeah, it was quite. What did I say? I think I said it was like the. Um, no, I've lost track. I was going to say something really. It was quite profound, but I can't remember now.
Well, I wish. Well, maybe you'll remember it. If you
Yeah,
remember it, just if I'm yammering on, just interrupt me.
yeah,
I was gonna say like I was just gonna. Oh, and that just gave me a flash. I don't really have much of a visual memory or availability of making pictures in my brain since I got ME, but I do get like flashes of things, and I just got flashes of the Jersey Shore and the like the noises of all the families and all the seagulls and
Mm,
just like the smells and um I loved and the feel of the sand, the
mm,
smell of the water, the breezes. Anyway, um I was thinking today as we were thinking about like the social deconditioning and the particular weirdness of like losing access to a lot of kinds of social interaction and sort of a lot of us are like fantastically isolated. I'm not sure where I fall on the spectrum of isolated. Like I don't feel like I've forgotten how to talk to people, but I do feel
mm.
like I've forgotten how to do small talk for sure. I don't know if I was ever great at it, but I was thinking about when I was on Twitter in 2020. I moved to like I was living in a shared house and I moved to a little condo and
Was that 4 years ago?
yeah,
Wow.
that was over 4 years ago. Yeah, because it was
Wow.
right before COVID started. It
Yeah.
was I moved right before COVID started and I've not recovered. Like I'm still not fully recovered from it and for whatever reason after I moved, I started getting really anxious about being on Twitter. It's a much longer story, but I don't know that I can exactly say why, but I just um my anxiety on there got to such a height that I just got off Twitter and
Mm,
I've been very little on social media since then. I lurk a little on Facebook, but I do remember at one point when I was on Twitter all the time and I remember people were having a conversation on Facebook and I went in there like a Twitter person on Facebook and then I
mm.
realized like I had made this total faux pas by being like a Twitter like because it was on a political topic and I went in there with like all hands on deck, like really sort of
Ranty.
um uh,
Like ranting.
yeah, like ranting, but more like with resources. I was like, oh my God, yeah, this is it was I think it was about the people knowing that we were likely to lose abortion rights or for uh reproductive care rights
Mm,
here and lose access to abortion but also a lot of other health care and so I went in there like a Twitter person and
mhm.
and I could just even though I could just imagine people just like if we were in an actual room everybody would go silent and they would just be looking at me like what the fuck are you
Mhm.
doing and I feel sometimes like I'm like that with me. Like if someone texts me and it's like, how are you doing? And I write like a lot of, they probably just want me to say fine, but instead I write
Yeah.
like a short novel. And I feel like, just, I think the way you do socialness is very different as someone with
Mm,
ME. And you kind of forget that people are just like, yeah, I'm fine. How are you? Fine.
yeah.
Whatever. I don't know.
I think the nice thing it is yeah, it is funny because like sometimes you've not had a social interaction, so you can just like and you might have a bit more energy, and like then you end up writing a whole stack. Like I know I'm like that sometimes, and like but then other times like you don't have the energy to write anything. So
Yeah.
I think the nice thing with um like ME friends is like you tend to know and know that if somebody's like not gotten back to you, it's not personal, or you know, um, you sort of don't have expectations of each
Yeah.
other in the same way that like maybe you know non-ME or
Yeah.
non-chronically ill people might for each other. But um, yeah, so like people that I do like message regularly, like sometimes I know that like you don't always get back to me and I don't always get back to you, but that's okay because we sort of just that's how we function sometimes. But yeah, it's
Yeah, I do my best to kind of say I'll get back to you tomorrow or when I can, but
mm,
sometimes I don't even have the spoons to. Sometimes that feels too hard to just
mm,
even be like, I can't write today. I'll write when I can. And I do have anxiety about not being able to sometimes send those kinds of emails, but like sometimes it just my brain is just screaming no, like my brain is just like I can't is yelling
mm,
like stop, leave me alone. I can't. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
It's like there's a certain pain that comes sometimes with even the smallest cognitive tasks
yeah,
and And I do want to say, like, you know, yeah, I tend to, there tends to be so much more leeway socially, I think, with people with ME, in terms of being in touch or not being in touch or the capacities. But I also, when you were talking about like people not getting back to you, you know, I think I have so much social grief, from ME, and like, I
Mm,
think some of the losses I've had in terms of just people not showing up and just disappearing from my life.
yeah.
I think that creates, on one hand, I think it's sort of maybe exacerbated some social anxiety, but on the other hand, I feel like I've gained some skills around giving people a lot more space because I think I could have done that more before I got ME, is just sort of understand that people's lives are busy, and they don't always have, regardless of their situation, like they don't always have the capacities to kind of,
Mm,
show up socially in the ways that I might want. And like, what does it look like to give people a lot more space and room, and have different expectations, like different social expectations,
mm,
which doesn't, it doesn't ease the pain of sort of either friends I've lost or friends that I feel that it is hard to interact with because of the ways either they interact around ME stuff, or sometimes political stuff, or it's, I think, um and it's interesting. It's like, when you think about the kinds of things that we ask of each other in a social interaction, like, I think I used to do a lot more emotional caretaking, and I think I have a lot more boundaries around certain kinds of interactions, but I think I have also a lot more compassion, um, about a lot of stuff. I don't know. It's weird. It's like, I think ME has kind of forced me to be harder in certain ways and softer in others. Maybe, I
mm,
don't know.
mm. It's interesting, that, isn't it? Yeah, it's about having to protect yourself sometimes, isn't it? To be able to, like, um, yeah, not be overwhelmed. Um, but it's that push and pull, isn't it? That we sometimes like crave social interaction, but at the same time just can't deal with it, and it's
Yeah,
horrible because you're sort of stuck, and you kind of like I know those days that you mentioned about where like I want to get back to somebody because they messaged me or whatever, or an email or something, and I just literally, like, it's the cognitive, it's like your cognitive abilities just like seized up, like you just, so for like a week or two nothing happens because you just I'm not saying I don't get back to people for weeks at two at a time. I try to, um but things, sometimes the podcast, like we end up like not getting much stuff out for the podcast because it's just like like sometimes I'll be able to like do quite a few things in editing and like, right, make sure I've got like our advert on or whatever like that, or all the little bits and pieces that we do. And then other times it's like, no, my brain's just not functioning to do that at all. And then when you take that into the world of social interaction, it's really hard because you like I just really miss having like colleagues or being in a work environment where you just can have a bit of banter or ask people how their weekend was, or stuff that
yeah,
we would have taken for granted. Like I miss those sort of social, those micro little social interactions, and then you sort of like, yeah, you take that kind of the wider picture into that. And yeah, oh man, I've gone tired now. We probably should stop soon because
yeah, we
we've been
should.
talking a while, haven't we? And
But
my brain's just like, I was
yeah,
on a really, yeah, I was going down a path of having a point, and then there was no point
yeah.
because it just stopped. It's like, where was I
I'm
going? I
still
don't know.
hoping it comes back, but I have
Yeah.
that a lot too. I was going to say one. Well, I'm going to try and say a few quick things before we get off. One is that there's a lot of people in my life who I would love to be in touch with, but it feels like too many kinds of spoons. Like, maybe maybe it's somebody I haven't talked to in a real long time, and I don't have the spoons to kind of deal with the complicatedness of that. Or, there's I think there's a lot of situations where it just feels like more than I have capacity for. And it's not because I don't care about the person or think about them. There's so many people who I think about and care about who I'm not in touch with for various reasons. Some of them because our lives have just kind of grown apart. Some because of Miami, people have just kind of are not interested in staying in touch. And some of sometimes it's my fault where I just feel like the amount of work that has to be done to make this relationship navigable is something that I don't have the spoons for. And it's, I think that's really sad too. All the ways that you kind of become a shadow, like you live in this shadowy world
Mm,
where um there's maybe a lot of people that have been in your life in various parts of your life that you just your world kind of gets smaller and I think smaller and smaller. And I feel very grateful for, the friends I have in my life. I think I feel very
mm,
yeah, I have wonderful friends, very a lot of a lot of a lot of connection considering my situation, a lot of wonderful connection. And I can't it's like I don't have the spoons to usually I don't have yeah I don't have the spoons to have that as much interaction as I'd like, but I still feel like when I do interact with people, it's for the most part just feels really nice. And it feels like there's enough care around sort of sensory stuff and capacities. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of even though most of my socializing is on video, that doesn't bother me. I mean, I wonder if I would love. So the other thing I was going to say, one is that I would love to hear if anyone has any thoughts on any of this stuff. Please leave comments or write to us or
mm.
whatever. I'd love to hear what people have to say, and if there's anything in this conversation that people would like us to explore more or talk more about. And before I give it back to Dan, and then um we close the episode, I just want to wish, it's tonight is Rosh Hashanah, so it's probably already started in England and some other places. And yeah, I just want to wish people a Shana Tova. And I was going to say a little more about that, but I'll just leave it there. And yeah, back to Dan.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, greetings. Um, season's greetings is that? Yeah, um, yeah. No, I think we've chewed the cud. I don't know what we're going to call this episode.
Well, we
But
already called one Chewed the Cud. This would be
we
like Chewed the Cud, Chewing the Cud 2,
part
the
two,
sequel.
yeah, or social deconditioning. Yeah, we will have to think about that. But yeah, we've got we've had a sort of just a bit of a break from um content going out, and I realize it's like a month. So but um we've got stuff that's coming up. And we're probably gonna have a break from recording things for a little bit as well. But we're always sort of working on stuff behind the scenes. So thank you to our patrons. Uh, and for people who've joined our Patreon recently. And you can give us money if you want, but you don't have to. So check the link out. It's just really appreciated because it'll help us cover our costs. I don't know if there's much more to say apart from we're always really bad at finishing, and we need to think of a way to finish our podcast. So if there's anything you can think of to finish it off, Dov, go for it.
Um, let's see. I mean, I feel like I could have talked for 12 hours on these topics, but I think we're lucky that sort of time and spoon, it's like we usually stay around an hour just because of spoons. And so we're forced to kind of create some kind of closure. But yeah, again, I'd love to hear from people. And yeah, just that this talking about this stuff just brings up so many memories and so many ideas and thoughts. And I was thinking we could even maybe do a ironic like social deconditioning theory or series and theory. If I would love if anybody, but
Write a theory for us.
the theory,
Yeah,
sorry, the
social
theory of
deconditioning. Yeah.
but yeah, it's I think a lot of people have stories to tell about the ways that their lives and their social worlds have changed, and I'm curious about that, and what that's sort of made you learn about yourself and about the world and about sort of um one I think one of the things that has been amazing in all of this being sick is not amazing, but I think I've learned a lot about sort of disability communities, sort of the chronic illness as a thing on its own, but also, all the things we have in common and all the differences. And there's just, I think that a lot of our social worlds have become small, but we're also very connected to each other in certain ways. And that's been very meaningful. And
Mm,
I guess that's a nice note to end on, sort of the kind of connection that grows around something, even if that thing is really hard. There's still a lot of really lovely connection with each
mm.
other. I mean, Dan, I'm so glad I met you, and I probably
Yeah,
would have.
yeah, yeah. Thanks to Twitter, which is really strange to think now, isn't it? Like, what's become
Twitter
of
and
Twitter? So,
ME.
yeah, yeah. No, it's good, and I appreciate you and appreciate the podcast that we've made together. So thank you, and it's been really good to chat and just to have a bit of a laugh and think absurdly outside the box on some things as well at times. And I hope everybody listening, if you're still listening, you've enjoyed our ramblings and thanks for listening. And yeah, keep in touch. Thank you.